and the plant indigo are identical, so it doesn't make sense to have a test that's going to make any chilik between them, and it's never going to be shayach that the Techeiles is going to pass the test and the kol ilan will fail if they're both the same. And there are a lot of chemists that went through this sugya, the Ian Rav, and most of them are even supporters of the Murex somehow. And there's a Dr. Alan Krupp. He's a retired professor of pigment chemistry, and he's very familiar with the dyeing process. And he writes, there should absolutely be no chemical difference between plant and snail indigo. Any chemical test that persists a difference is not valid, in my opinion. And so therefore, behechrich, it's not, you have one of two choices. I mean, basically, you either have a choice of saying that kol ilan does not mean the plant indigo, which is assumed to be that that's the case. And if that's the indigo, if that's the kol ilan of what Chazal are referring to, then the Techeiles achilazim cannot be the Murex. There was another professor who was a Nobel Prize winner, chemist. He has a very sad way of saying things, and he basically says that he clings to the conclusion that the Murex indigo is Techeiles. He says, no question, it's proven that that is the fact. And therefore he says, must be that he has questions, Cholila Chazal's Bechina, their test. He says, to him it doesn't make sense, but he knows that it is the Chilazim, so how could Chazal say that there's a chilik? And Chazal don't even say, not only do they say there's a chilik, but they bring down Amarayim, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Yehuda, who Taka used the test. And Taka was checked to see if it was like that. And then there's also just a third one, his name is Dr. Irving Zeiderman, who is a chemist whose work led to the creation of the Ptil group. He's one of the backers of it. And he acknowledges that the Murex indigo is guaranteed to fail the Gemara's chemical test, and therefore rejects the theory of the Murex indigo being genuine Techeiles. So all these chemists and anybody who understands, basically it seems, what the tests of Chazal are doing, realize that Murex indigo and plant indigo are both one of the same, and if it can't be a chilik between them, and it must be that that's not the Techeiles, not the Chilaz and the Techeiles. We were left with two kashas, if so, that there's another type that's taka the real Techeiles, Chilaz and Techeiles. Let's say it's the cuttlefish for argument's sake, or for any other one, and that both the Murex and the indigo are both no good. So there were two kashas we had. First of all, the Gemara Menachos Mevur, that there is only two types. There's either kol ilan or there's the Techeiles Achilazim. Amr Lu Rabachoi Eloha, he took it materially and he tested it. There were two tests Chazal gave. One of the tests passed, and the first test failed. And he says, Amr Lu Rabachoi Eloha loy tchelpi v'loy kol ilani. Eloshma mina. It can't be. It either has to be Techeiles or it's kol ilan. So now we're saying now that there's kol ilan, there's plant indigo, there's also the Techeiles of Chazal, of the Torah, and then there's a third one of Murex, which seems to be a third one. Chazal didn't see, and you knew about it. Why didn't they, second of all, why didn't they warn anybody about it? It was something that was used a lot, abundantly, in the time of Chazal, in the same area between Sur and Haifa. It was very motzei over there, and that's what Chazal say the real Techeiles is, and not to warn somebody. So as far as the first child is concerned, the Gemara is before that there's only two types. There's kol ilan. So the Kesef Mishnah in Ilchis Tzitzis, he has a kasha on the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't even bring down the lashon kol ilan. The Rambam brings down the lashon of istis. Chazal many times in the Mishnayos bring down the word istis upua. Istis, the Rambam uses that as his counterfeit for Techeiles. And he says, or v'chein shar hamashkirim, or any other type of material that produces blue dye, when he uses it for kol ilan. He says, why don't you just say kol ilan? The Kesef Mishnah says that kol ilan, the word kol ilan has a narrow terminology, a definition very narrow, which is the plant indigo, but it also has a much broader and an umbrella type of lashon. The Kesef Mishnah's lashon is it's a shem kailul. It also is a very general term for any type of thing that produces blue that wasn't Techeiles wasn't the chilazon at Techeiles. Chazal call it kol ilan. And so therefore, the fact that Chazal didn't warn, they did warn us. They said kol ilan you can't use. Included in kol ilan, says the Kesef Mishnah, is everything. As a matter of fact, there's 250 different types of plants that you could get blue dye that were used over the Tkufas. There were used 250. There's not only one indigo plant, kol ilan. It happens to be that the indigo plant is the highest concentrated blue that they could get, but there's many other dyes, other plants that they produced plenty of blue out of, and Chazal didn't talk about any of those. There's a stone called the lapis lazuli, which was used. I used to grind it and make it. And Stam is a Maimra Musgar. Today there's a sect called the Karoyim. They're similar. They live in Shemra now. They're similar to the Tzedaikim. They don't believe in Torah Shebal Peh, and they take a weird tzitzis with Techeiles on it. But what type of Techeiles? It doesn't say in the Torah that you need a dog. You don't need a snail of any sort. And they use istis. They use taka today. It's called woad. For some reason, I don't know, they don't use the indigo plant of kol ilan, even though that is a much easier way to produce blue. They somehow had their messiah that it's istis, which is a different type, which is woad, and that's what they use today. There's many other types. Where did Chazal mention it? Where did Chazal warn it? They did. They said kol ilan. Don't use kol ilan. Kol ilan, Dr. Kesef Mishnah, includes everything. As far as the other kasha, that why did they warn about the murex if it was such a common usage out of it, and it was in the same area? Why did they warn about it? So for that also, there's a number of answers for that. First of all, they did warn it because they said kol ilan, which includes everything. Second of all, they did give simonim. They gave gufa doim liyam, briosa doim lidag. They give someone very specific simonim as to what type of fish it's going to be, what type of marine thing it's going to be, and the murex basically fails and doesn't explain just about any single one of the Chazal's tests. What are the Chazal simonim? So that in itself is a way of giving us a warning not to use it. But besides that, Chazal were warning pashtus for counterfeiters, which are going to use a very inexpensive type, and it's going to look the exact same as the Techeiles achilazim, which was more expensive. But for Chazal to be chayshish that somebody's going to go ahead and use the murex dye, which is so expensive, like we said, it's 20 times worth its weight in gold. Why would they even be chayshish that somebody is going to use that to counterfeit, to make like he has it, when it's probably, for all I know, worth more, is just as much as the regular Techeiles? So why would he do that? So the Chazal didn't have to warn that. Besides the fact that we've spoken in the past that there's absolutely zero evidence, not in the archaeological digs and not in the writings of the ancient historians, that they had any idea bichlal as to how to produce blue from the murex dye. The pashtus, all the mitzvahs that they said, all the writings were purple. Today, they had it on its own, they figured it out. So they say if they did it today, Mustama, they knew then. It's Lavadavka at all that they knew. They didn't find any cloths from those days that they could prove that were blue. Every one that they had that's blue was shown to be that it was used pashtus from plant indigo. And so therefore, that in itself could be the answer, that Chazal didn't feel that they have to warn because they weren't even aware of that you're able to make a dye, blue dye out of this. And just to end off, this same kasha, why they didn't warn, is really a kasha even on those who support the murex itself. And the reason being is because one of the answers that we didn't mention, but that they go with very strong, as to that the simonim doesn't seem that somebody's looking for the chilazim, and you give him, you arm him with these simonim that Chazal gave, gufa doim liyam, briosa doim liyam, no one's ever going to find it. They say, no. Chazal, we're not trying to give it to somebody who doesn't know at all what the chilazim is. We're talking about a person that knows that the chilazim is a snail, and he knows that it's in this area, and he knows that it's one of these 3, 4, 5 types of snails. The question is, which one pump do you want? The Chazal said it has to be this one, this. So once already you have a choice of 5, these simonim fit in better with the murex trunkless as opposed to the other snails. So in other words, it comes out that according to what they're saying is that, at least according to this, that the Techeiles achilazim has to be, according to them, only the murex trunkless. The brandaris, the hemastimo, those would not be good. And that's why Chazal gave these simonim, which identify specifically the murex, not as opposed to other fish, because that we knew that it wasn't other fish, but specifically to be mavkin between the murex and the other snails. So that means that the other snails are puzzle. And it happens to be that when if you go through the same process of getting out the blue dye from the murex trunculus, slightly more difficult, but basically the same mahalach, you can get out the same blue from the brandaris, the hematoma, and all the other snails, basically, you can get out the same blue. So according to them, why didn't Chazal warn that, hey, you better be careful not to use not only kol ilan, but don't use the other types of snails, which according to them is no good, and yet could produce blue. And the teretz is because it was included, according to them, in the simonim of Chazal, that they said that it has to have these simonim. So the same thing is not shver, even according to if you disagree with the murex. And the reason why they didn't mention it in kol ilan is either they did mention it in kol ilan, or because they did mention it in the simonim in which they gave to the gufay de Milyam.